All right. I feel like I need to have. Man, this is always such a weird transition. I've been intensely alone by myself all morning without talking to anybody. And then I turn on the camera and I have to be social. So it takes me a little while to get my brain transitioned into speaking. Um, Welcome. This is the Thursday live broadcast. I do have a lot of things that I'd like to get to today in the critique, and so I don't want to take too much time here, and want to jump right into it. But I did want to say that for these broadcasts, I would love to critique your work. So if you're finding this for the first time, if you're an artist, a creator at whatever skill level, and you're looking for somebody just to respond to your work, so you know whether or not it's doing what you want it to do, or you would like just another pair of eyes to just to see what's working, what's not working, and get some feedback. That's what I'm hoping this broadcast is here to do and here to accomplish. So, if you have work that you are working on currently or recently finished that you would like critiqued, um, send me an image at dabbleon, dabbleon.com, at gmail.com, and I will do my best to address your work here on this broadcast. Also, if there are things in particular, specific things about your work that you would like discussed or would like me to respond to, then make sure you let me know in your email. I do have two artists sent in work today, and I would like to, and I've got a lot to dig in on their work. Oh, one last thing, man, brain's not working. One last thing is I have a podcast that I've been working on, a new podcast that I'm calling Raw Materials, that is coming very, very soon. I've already recorded 2 episodes. One has been edited, and I'm just plugging in all the back end stuff to get it up and running, but be looking for that in the near future. Also, I have some class offerings that are coming up very soon. So if you are interested in any of these announcements or any information about this stuff, go to dabbleon, dabbleon.com, and sign up for my email newsletter. Or it's not really a newsletter, it's just for email updates on what's going on. So you can get information about that as it comes up. And I'm hoping to get crit groups set up. That would be small groups of about 5-ish artists a piece, and I will be involved in that as well as kind of a moderator. And the idea behind crit groups is that you would meet once a month with this small group, and share work that you're working on, and have again a community to respond to and to get feedback from, and ideas from, and inspiration from. So that is hopefully coming soon as well. So if you're interested in any of these things, in classes, in crit groups, in broadcasts, and I also have another podcast called Room in the Trees, which has been going for several years now. And if you're interested in that, that's at roominthetrees.com. And I think that's it. I'm kind of talking fast because I want to get to this artwork. Okay, so let's get over to the computer screen here. And hold on just a second. I'm going to start with um, this image right here. So there are, let me see, I've got this, and this coming from the same artist. And all of them, I'm going to actually, this strawberry is the second artist. So the birds and these abstract line pieces are one artist, and there are a couple things that I would like to address in each one, um, that I think are working well, and other things that you might want to consider or pay attention to. So let's start with this one. So first off, this one is actually is a very nice composition. You know what I'm finding out today? For some reason, I do not have my Wacom tablet set up correctly, so that is why it is not has not been working particularly well for me for these past couple of weeks. Just my screen setup has not been ideal for what how I typically use a Wacom tablet. So that is actually probably going to be more hindrance than help. All right, so just the general composition, this big white shape of the bird's head and the curving S shape of the neck, and then how these shoulders kind of overlap in front of the head. Just as an abstract shape, just in terms of visual information, that's a really interesting shape. And the way that the body shape kind of counteracts or pushes against this, so you kind of have this that dynamic happening there is, and that spatial relationship right there, really, really cool. And then you have again the neck kind of, maybe it looks like it's coming in front of maybe the lower jaw right here. So there's this nice spatial relationship where you got the shoulder in the foreground, and that overlaps the neck, which overlaps the bottom of this jawline, or I don't even know if it's called a jaw when it's a bird. The way that the amount of space that the bird occupies in the composition is really nice. It's obviously a focal point, so the simplicity of the composition is a good thing, and it's a strong visual statement. There's not a whole lot going on in the negative space to distract our attention. It's easy to lock in on what this image is all about. There's a little light texture and some gradients in the background that just serve as a point of contrast with this white, the white of the bird. But really, it's a very simple composition, and I think benefits from that. What I'm noticing is you have this kind of echo or ripple shape, kind of a ghost shape in that darker blue that hugs right around the circumference of the bird. You kind of see how there's this darker blue that sits pretty tightly around the bird right there. I'm trying to be as exact as I can be so you can see what I'm talking about. So like right around there, which is a nice framing device. It helps make the bird stand out even more and helps us lock in our attention on the bird. What I would suggest, though, is that perhaps that could be just expanded a little bit more. Sometimes you see this. It's a fairly common tool to use to have that echoing kind of. It's almost like a reverse glow, right? It's not a light glow. It's a kind of this dark shadow, and it's a really nice framing device and a nice point of contrast. But I guess the risk that's run there. Let me keep on trying to. The risk that's run there is that sometimes it can feel a little bit restrictive or claustrophobic, like it's saran wrapped around the bird, or in kind of an uncomfortable way, rather than kind of I don't know, it just kind of draws attention to itself. So what I wanted to do here is, let me set this to a multiply layer, and I'm going to reduce the strength of my brush here. And if I just kind of expand out, I'm going to choose, let me see if I can get a better blue there to work with. Okay. All right, so actually I'm not going to worry too much about that. So if I just take that dark area out away from the bird a little bit more. Again, I'm going to reduce the strength of the brush. It might be a little bit too much. Just so it doesn't sit so close to the edge of the bird. Let me turn that on and off. So this is as it is now, and then turning that on. So the intention here is not just it's darkening a little bit, which is going to make it more contrasty, which you might or might not like. You might not want more contrast. You might want a kind of a gentler, less poppy feel. But really, what I'm after here is that I'm taking this dark blue outline that you have around the bird and trying to just expand it a little bit, so it's not sitting quite so close uh, to the outline of the bird. I do like how you've got that dark blue that's kind of transitioning into this turquoise or kind of blue green down at the bottom. And that blue green is a lighter value, which doesn't contrast as much with the body over here or this texture of the wings. And what that's doing is it's making less contrast down here at the bottom, more contrast up by the head, which is where you really want us to pay attention. So that was a good decision, I think. And then finally, the last thing that I wanted to point out here is, or actually before I get to that, one way that you could get us even more locked in on the head and maybe less, I don't know, less drawn down to this bottom right corner, if that indeed was something that you wanted, would be to kind of take the same principle and darken this whole corner, making the contrast even less, kind of take some of that turquoisey blue. And what that's going to do is it's going to de-emphasize this bottom corner because there's less contrast, and also at the same time create more contrast in just the color of this bird's body and feathers with the head, so the head becomes even more contrasty and popping. So that would be another way just to, and again, it kind of depends on if you want it to be a really, to pop a lot, or if you want it to be less confrontative or less kind of standing out, right? Less contrasty. Then perhaps you don't want to do that. But that'd be one way to get this to really start popping. And then the last thing that I wanted to say here is what's going on here in the face. So in the rest of the body, you've treated the bird with fairly soft brushwork, right? So look at these edges along the neck here. It's fairly high contrast. You do have some edges like down here in the neck where there is some pretty dramatic or sharp edges. Let me get a color there that you can see. So there are some sharp edges. I've got to get some. All right. So there are some sharp edges along here in the neck. Over on this side, it's much softer and it's a broken edge. But generally, all of these edges, and especially down here at the wings, we almost lose the edges there of the feathers and the wings into the background. But then you get up here to the eye and the beak and the top of the head, and there's this really graphic, sharp black outline, which is just fine, and it really makes this area much more striking. It stands out because of this very loose brushiness of the rest of the paint quality and the rest of the image. It really makes this graphic black line stand out a lot. But I would say that you probably want to choose areas in that dark black outline to soften a little bit so it doesn't feel quite so cut out. So for example, what I might say is right here on the top of the beak, taking a little bit of that blue and got to find a way to automate these different brush settings. So taking a little bit of that blue and going over the black just to soften that edge a little bit, right? So let me see if I can turn that on and off. So this is, let me see if move that in a little bit. This is without and this is with. It's a very subtle difference. I just basically put a little bit of blue on top of that black dark outline. But what it's doing is it's just making that feel less cut out by or like less outlined. So it's as if like part of the face is like a comic book with a really strong dark contour line, while the rest of it is more a kind of a traditionally painterly type of brushwork. And I would just go throughout here and find some places where, like right here, you kind of do that a little bit. I'd find places where you could kind of just decrease the strength of that dark black outline where it's not necessary. Especially as we get kind of further away from the eye. I kind of feel like that eye is where you want us really to spend most of our time. So I'm not going to do much more of that here, but like up here, it's starting to feel really strong along. My brush is I keep on going too soft. All right. Along the top edge here, so maybe going from both directions, the turquoise in the feathers on the bottom, and then also the white from the top. And it doesn't need to be done everywhere. I'm going to turn that on and off again. But some places where, so it just doesn't feel so cut out, so striking. Oh, come on. I keep on invoking Siri. All right. So it just doesn't feel quite so strikingly cut out. So let me turn that on and off again. Fairly subtle difference, but again, it's trying to help connect what's happening there to the rest of the painting. And then the last thing that I'm going to say here is that the beak feels like it, because you have this implied highlight and shadow relationship on the head and on the body, you've got cast shadows. That kind of relationship should also be happening in the beak. The beak is probably a little bit shiny. Typically beaks are. So you would have at least a little bit of highlight and shadow happening on the beak, just like you have on the body. So the light looks like it's coming from top right, our top right, the viewer's top right. So you would probably have a little bit of a highlight happening right up here on the top of the beak, and then if it's shiny, you might even have like kind of a specular highlight where it gets reflected more dramatically, kind of. Let me do that again, like right there. That might be too much. Let me do a smaller, thinner line. Like something like that. And what that's doing is it's just bringing the beak into conformity with the light logic that you've established with the body. As it is right now, again, I'm going to turn that off. As it is right now, it just feels like there's no highlight and shadow relationship on the beak, which doesn't make sense if everything else that is attached to the same body is interacting with some, light source. All right, so I'm going to turn that back on. And that's about it. Really nice image. I mean, it's striking in its simplicity. The colors are really pleasing, and it's a fairly analogous color scheme, meaning the colors are all fairly close together on the color wheel, except for, of course, the beak, which is a really, it pops out because it's an orange right next to a blue, which is a complementary color relationship. So a lot of really nice, nice subtle brushwork happening here, which means that we are kind of lured in by the simplicity of this big white shape on a dark, simple background. But then we can enter in and get involved in some of these striking, more kind of illustrative or graphic details in these the dark outlines on the beak and the eye area. And then, we're paid off even more when we spend more time and appreciate the subtle brushwork happening elsewhere in the image. All right. So this is before, then adding a little, expanding that dark blue kind of halo around the bird a little bit, and then darkening the foreground right bottom of the image, and then here decreasing the strength of some of those dark black outlines and bringing in a little bit of highlight on the beak. All right, so well done, very cool. You could also just be done. It's a nice. So, that's going to be the disclaimer on all of my critiques, is sometimes you just leave them alone and, take the instruction and see whether or not you agree with it, and also learn from it so that you can apply it the next time around, or the next painting. I think we often do ourselves a disservice by trying to go back and fix every little thing. Sometimes it's best just to learn from from a painting and then apply the things we learn in the next one. So this is excellent painting. I think you could leave it alone. It could be done as is. But those are my little bits of instruction. Okay, moving on to the next one. So this one, I could also talk about some of the same things I just talked about. So we have a light logic established in the body, in the head, the light source again coming from top right. And I would probably spend a little bit more time thinking about how that light source, or bringing the beak into consistency with that sense of light and shadow that's established in the body. So there's a consistency in the light logic between the beak and the body. But I don't really feel like I need to get too much into that. I could also, talk about the same idea of maybe softening some of these hard edges so that they relate more to the soft brushwork elsewhere in the image. And it doesn't need to be everywhere. You don't need to get rid of that entirely, but some places so that it doesn't feel so cut out. So an example of that would be down here in the body where you have done that. On this bottom left side, there's a really high contrast sharp edge. And then up here at the top right, there's less contrast there, and also the way that you've applied the paint, the brushwork, is a little bit more broken up, a little bit more fragmented. And what that does is it visually ties the brushwork in the body to the brushwork in the background, and doesn't make it feel so cut out or separate. So I would just say more areas where that happens would help, I don't know, just unite the bird more with the negative space, or the space around the bird. The one thing that I wanted to point out in this one, though, that I would just caution against is notice that around the feet, we've got the shadow being cast by the bird on whatever surface it is that the bird's standing on. But notice around the feet, there's this kind of halo of light. This halo of light blue that seems to be a similar blue, if not the exact same blue, as the blue that's around the shadow area, right? So what most likely happened here is that this artist was trying to protect the feet. So so the artist spent all this time developing this wonderful detail and resolution in the feet, and didn't want to mess that up. So we tend to protect that by leaving a little buffer, right? A little area. And the problem is that it doesn't take much for the illusion that we're creating of light interacting with 3D objects in space. It doesn't take much for that to get disrupted and completely, the illusion is broken. So I would just be very, very careful and not allow that to happen. Bring this shadow right up, and let me get a better color there, right up to the edge of that foot. Get a small brush and bring it right up to the edge. Don't let that little halo form. Let me bump up the power of my brushes. Don't let that little halo form. So the illusion of, or the light logic that you're establishing, is not shattered. We do notice that stuff. All right, so I'm going to turn this layer. This is off, and this is on. Do you see? Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to maybe zoom in a little bit more on that area. So turning that off, we've got that little light halo happening around the foot. And what that's doing is it's breaking the illusion that we're creating of light interacting with space and objects in space. And it's instead making this feel, instead of like a cast shadow, it starts to feel just like a smudge of dirt or smudge of something on the background, right? So don't let those little halos happen. Bring that color right up to the edge. Sometimes you can avoid that and if you want to protect the detail in the feet, in this case, doing a mask. So there are different masking ways of masking with depends on the medium you're using. There are Frisket liquids, Frisket films, plastics like vinyl stickers you can cut out to mask out that area if you want to protect it. Um, and just kind of depends on what you're using. If you're using acrylic paint, then I would use a Frisket, like a vinyl film, and cut that out. Or you can just use a small brush and bring it up to it. The last thing that I'm going to say about that shadow is it feels a little like it got a little too neutral. Your colors in the background and on the ground here are fairly saturated, and to my eye, it feels like that's the shadow's going a bit too gray. In which case you could just bring kind of like a glaze of color. Let me see if I can do that. Just, no, that's the wrong color. So maybe take a version of that turquoise-ish and let's bring a little bit of that. So I'm going to do this kind of in a blunt way. That's going to ruin your feet a little bit there. But let me just turn that off and on a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. So that gray, the gray just got a little too neutral. I'd bring a little bit more color back into that. I'm not saying that it needs to go lighter or darker. If you wanted it to feel like a stronger cast shadow and more dramatic lighting, which would probably be more consistent with a logic that you're establishing, the light and dark relationship you have in the body. You could make it darker, but more than that, I'm saying that you probably just can glaze that with a little bit of whatever color it is that you're using here in the background. Looks like it might be a cerulean or a combination of cerulean and ultramarine. All right, and that's all I wanted to say about this one. That eye. What about that eye? Eye is just like this dot staring right at me. The eye might, I'm sure you're working from photo reference here, so I'm sure you're, following that. But some highlight shadow relationship in the eye might also be in order, kind of darkening the bottom part and then giving us a little bit even more of a highlight up at the top. Or even a specular highlight. That might be too wide. Specular highlight is like the shiny surfaces, when light bounces off of shiny surfaces. Oh, Siri. I called Siri up again. All right. So I'm going to turn that off and on. So eyes are natural focal points, right? Just psychologically, we're always looking for that particular pattern, for that relationship, little circle with a dark center, that communicates eye, and we want to make eye contact, whether it be a human being or another animal. Eye contact is always a natural thing. So giving us a little bit more form, a little bit more three-dimension in the eye, or just, basically a little bit more variety rather than it being, a flat color, might just be a nice little bit more payoff. When we reach that focal point. Right now it's a fairly uniform blue and dark circle right there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It is kind of nice as a graphic image, as it is. All right, good work on that. I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is totally different, except for we got this little sea creature. I think that's a fish, maybe. It looks like a fish, like a goldfish. And I suspect that you might be finding a fish inside an abstract mark that you were making. Maybe this is one of along the same lines of, or the same series as these, and then you pulled a fish out of it, which is a cool idea. And I kind of like how this fish becomes the focal point in the organization of all of these presented together, right? It's the only point of color, and it's a fairly high color contrast with, again, the oranges and blues, those complementary colors. I guess we do have a little splashes of saturated color elsewhere in the overall composition of lines. But this obviously is the largest area of color in the whole thing and high color contrast there. So I like that. I like that all of these abstract line kind of gestural marks, how they tie into this gestural mark of the fish, but then it differentiates itself or becomes kind of an anomaly amongst all these other squares by being more representational. It becomes a fish and then more color as well. So it's kind of a cool grouping, cool overall composition of these kind of gestural marks. The I don't know if I want to say anything necessarily about these gestural marks. I think they all feel very alive and interesting. I guess maybe the one thing that I will say about them is you might consider what other ways that you could imbue them with energy, right? And I don't think you necessarily need to change their shape, size, direction, anything about them, but I think you could go in and refine a little bit. So, for example, in this one, how could you just alter or adjust or refine the thickness of this line to create more momentum, more energy? Let me see if I can bump up these up a little bit. I've got to get my Wacom tablet working better. I'm not going to do this. So I do like how there's that little thickness at the end of that line, how it gets a little bit thicker. But how could you, then as it comes down here, it gets thinner and thinner. So adjusting, I'm not doing a very good job of that, but adjusting the thickness of that line, just a very slight adjustment. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Just pushing it a little bit more. Like down here, you've got some line quality here where it's thick, and then it goes thins out, and then thick again, and then thin. So there's this kind of undulation. I think you could probably push that even further to great effect. And then the last thing that I wanted to say about these is I like in this one over here. So over here, how you have this one that kind of breaks the border, this dark black border. You've got this white line that continues into this gestural mark, kind of breaking that space or breaking out of that boundary, right? That's really nice. And there might be other opportunities to do that. And not only that is, what if you were to break that all the way through that black boundary and open it up then to interact more with some of these other gestures, right? So what if, for example, this, let's see if I could, no, I want to go black. So if this line were to break right through there and maybe even continue through the black, and then all of a sudden our eye is going to want to then continue that up into this gesture up here. So I'm not saying that you need to add this black line right here, but our eye is going to be more apt. Once you break that boundary for us visually, we're going to follow the momentum as we view the image or view the combination of images. We're going to follow that momentum up into this composition up here. And then maybe you could figure out, find ways of then interacting with the next one, right? And it wouldn't have to be necessarily as explicit as that, as making that line that literally points up, but finding ways. And again, this is all just kind of in the spirit of refining what's happening here. Thinking about how you can use line quality, making some areas thicker, thinner, maybe adjusting how squiggly some areas you have really sharp, continuous edges, and other that feel more blotchy, where they kind of get blobby in some areas. So adjusting, using that to create more visual variety. And again, it could just be little refinements, and then also thinking about how they relate to each other and how you can start getting our eye moving and creating visual pathways for us to jump from square to square. And I like this dotted line. You're kind of doing that same idea of this line that turns into the negative white on black when it gets to this border, and you break that border for us, and then we're going to be able to visually travel out of that boundary and then enter in elsewhere. Anyway, like that. I like this combination of gestures, and then, like I said, that little fish that's happening there and how that relates to the rest. So really cool. I dig it. I like that. I like the overall composition, and then I like how fun and energetic the individual pieces are as well. So well done on that one. Okay, and I think that that's it for the birds and the fish. The birds and the fish. Really well done. Thank you for sending those in. It was really fun to see them. And also some great examples of things to think about. Thank you for sharing those. And as usual, saying this to everybody, it's can be nerve-wracking to put your work up for critique. It can take something that you were happy with, that you were satisfied with, and when somebody points out a flaw, it can ruin it for you. So I hope I'm not doing that here. Taking something that you are satisfied with and just, bringing you dissatisfaction. That's not the intention here, but I do appreciate you kind of giving us an opportunity to learn from what you're doing and also to be inspired by it. All right, so I'm going to turn off some of the things that I did here. This is a different artist. I got this image in an email. She's been working and reworking this painting. It used to have two butterflies down here in the bottom left. It used to be more green. She didn't like the shape or look of this background strawberry. Thought it looked maybe too generic. I'm not sure exactly what is meant by a generic strawberry, but I think I kind of get the idea is that it felt unremarkable, or maybe like a cartoon of a strawberry instead of like a unique strawberry. So we're going to take a look at this one. This white kind of ghosty color, I got the feeling was not meant to be what it would look like finished, but rather just a way to start rethinking the shape of that strawberry, this overall shape. So she's just kind of cutting it back, not thinking that she's going to leave the white there per se, but just trying to find the right shape for the strawberry. And I think it's worth pointing out here, I think that's not a bad way to go. Not a bad way to go. So one of the reasons I like that is because it shows me that she's thinking big, right? She's going back, she's refactoring the big picture, the big relationships, these big shapes, and not worrying about, she's kind of blocking out the detail, because the detail is just going to distract you from being able to see the success or failure of that foundation, of the overall larger shape relationships. So I think that's a good call. But in this case, that is also definitely affecting our ability to see how these butterflies are affecting the overall composition, because we lose the contrast there, right? So it's a little bit more tricky to see how these butterflies are going to affect the overall way we read this image, because they get kind of lost in that similar color and texture that she's using to cut down the strawberry. Anyway, so I think there's something to be learned there just in the attitude, right? If something's not feeling right and you need to make big changes, don't be afraid to make big changes. Take a brush, start just cutting it out, cutting it down, reconfiguring and seeing what works. So overall, I think the shape of the strawberry, we're so zoomed in on the strawberry. Really, you could do most things. Strawberries have enough variety in the sizes and shapes. They get to be where they're almost perfectly round. They get to be like they're more elongated, like this one in the foreground. That it's going to be a believable strawberry in the context of this foreground strawberry, no matter what, as long as they are similar colors and we see this green top. So, I don't know if I think uh, that is a deal breaker for me in terms of getting the shape right. I think the more important shape perhaps is this foreground strawberry. So I'm going to turn on a layer here that I was kind of messing with earlier. For me, the perhaps the bigger issue is less about the shape of this background strawberry and more that it ought to be, or there's an opportunity here to use that strawberry as a point of contrast for the butterfly. And I think that is probably not, that should not be gotten rid of. It looks like the strawberry used to go behind the butterfly and made the butterfly stand out, but now the butterfly is like kind of, we don't know if the butterfly is in front, closer to us than the strawberry, or if it's off to the side. So that spatial relationship is not there. Or it's not clear. And I think because of that, not as strong, or it kind of it feels more disjointed. I would clarify that by, at the very least, bringing the edge of the strawberry out enough so that it at least goes behind the edge, right? At least a little bit of the wing of the butterfly, so that that spatial relationship isn't lost. And also, of course, that's also creating a point of contrast to make the butterfly stand out a little bit more, which is a good thing. All right, so that feels more comfortable to me. We've clarified the relationship between the butterfly and the strawberry in space, and also just that's another visual cue for us to lock in on to understand what we're seeing, right? And that is a good thing. Like it makes it so we can relate more to the image, and easier for us to kind of comprehend what it is that we're seeing. As she had before, I think there would be more kind of darker greens happening behind the butterfly, which would also help set it off from the background. So just kind of generally blocking in some of these more neutral greens, but darker value to kind of set that off. Now it's becoming more prominent as a compositional element, right? It's a small shape amongst big shapes, right? It is much more busy or specific or detailed or resolved than the way that the rest of the image is being painted. So that sets it apart. It's a really nice focal point, right? It's a really nice place for us to land. It's a nice bit of contrast and bit of detail compared to the more painterly, brushy work of the strawberries. So compositionally, I think this feels to me a lot stronger, right? Just bringing out the edge of the strawberry a little bit, and putting a little bit of dark and simplifying the area, negative space around the butterfly. That helps out a lot in that area. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this upper right-hand corner. I think there is a lot that you could do or some that you could do, I shouldn't say a lot, to help simplify that area. I don't feel like it's the primary place you want us to be looking or paying attention. I think you could probably make it so that our eye kind of travels up, catches this butterfly, and that helps lead us up into this corner. But I don't necessarily think this is, something that I need to spend too much time on in this critique. The last thing another thing that I wanted to talk about in this one is the way that this line at the bottom of the foreground strawberry continues up and catches the edge of this background strawberry. I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but it's catching my eye, and maybe just makes it a little bit more difficult for me to like, it's just a little bit jarring. It makes it a little bit more difficult to determine the spatial relationship between the foreground strawberry and the background strawberry, like where this is sitting on the table versus where that background strawberry is sitting. Is there enough room between this strawberry and that strawberry to account for the volume of each and how they relate to each other. So that might just be fixed by getting rid of this this little white halo that's there right now to help us make sense of the highlight and shadow, the light logic that you're establishing here. Maybe that's enough to separate out the strawberry there. I don't, let's see. So that might be, something like that might be enough to fix that. But another idea that I had would be to just extend the strawberry, top of the strawberry shape out a ways. So that it goes past this left edge of the back strawberry a little bit, just to disrupt that line that's happening, that tendency that we have to just find that continuity and maybe just break that up a little bit. I don't know. As I'm doing that, it looks like the strawberry is getting to be a little bit, too big, but something along those lines. The last thing that I wanted to say about this image is addressing this idea of it being the strawberry feeling too generic or too common. And I think there's a couple different ways. It's a matter of taste, right? I don't know exactly what it is visually about it that makes you feel like it's too generic or too common. It could be the overall shape of the strawberry, or it could just be how the colors of it or how it's being treated. A couple things that I could suggest, though, is I wanted to bring or refer to, let me get over here to an artist who I have a lot of respect for and whose work I really love. And her name is Anne Gale. Let me bring this up in a different window here and see if I can zoom in. So Anne Gale, I think I've probably mentioned her before in a broadcast. What she does is she has, in a lot of her paintings anyway, she has in the negative space, in the area around the figure, leaves the marks, the brush strokes, very big and general and loose. And then as we get into the figure, and then even more so into the face, you can see down here in the body, we still have fairly loose, open, large brush strokes. But increasingly, as we get towards the face, the eyes, nose, mouth, the marks get smaller and smaller. And that kind of vibration that happens as things get smaller and closer together, almost like a little colony of ants, right? Or like those pieces get more concentrated, there's just more of an energy in there. And so I thought that might be one way to do that, is you kind of already have a little bit of that happening with the way that you're resolving some of the seeds here, and leaving some of the rest of the area open and more brushy. So I don't think you need to make everything equally refined or equally busy or broken up into smaller pieces, but maybe just some areas where some of the seeds are more resolved and more detailed might help just make it feel less general, right? Less treated evenly across the whole thing. And then you could also find a couple places, and I think I mentioned this to you before, where you could just bring little zips of really saturated color. You have the stem, which is a green, and then the rest of the strawberry, which is red. So there's an opportunity there to really hit us with high color contrast. So I was saying, like in this area, maybe do it in a very subtle way, where you choose a really low value area of the image and just hit it with a really saturated, deep red there. And then right next to it on the stem, bring a shadow of really saturated green. So when we pull out, let me zoom in on that. So there's not very much value contrast between those, the red and the green here, but they're complementary colors. So there's high high color contrast, hue contrast. So when we zoom out, it's not really grabbing our attention because it's low value contrast, but there's just a little zip of high concentration hue contrast happening up there. And I think something similar, you wouldn't, again, don't do it everywhere, but just little moments where there's that little zap of high color contrast would be nice. And I think you could do probably the same down at the top of this strawberry. And that might also start to create a pattern that we're going to jump back and forth between those two areas. All right, so those are maybe some of my ideas for making it feel less generic. Maybe create some areas on the strawberry that feel more resolved or have more detail, and letting some of the other areas feel more brushy. Those areas of high concentration or high detail are going to become more emphasized, and grab our attention more and just create more visual variety for us to engage with. You could use little moments in the strawberry, especially up here at the stem, to create high color contrast. And then I guess the last thing that I would say is you could just create more versions of this red, right? So on your palette, take a base color of red. It looks like you kind of have this base magenta-y, cad medium E, like a combination of alizarin and cad red medium. Make a big puddle of that, and then just make a bunch of little variations of that color that you could dip your brush into as you paint, just to create more variety in the colors that you're working with. That might also be a way to introduce just a little bit more visual interest and make it feel less uniform. Okay, so I think that is basically all that I had to say about this one. So I should have said to begin with, compositionally, it's a very strong composition. Like, you've got these really simple shapes of the strawberries. You're zoomed in. You let them fill the whole composition. It doesn't feel like you're, that there's anything unnecessary or any dead space where the negative space feels like it's not engaged or alive or part of the composition. You've really, there's a nice triangle down here at the bottom left. You have a nice diagonal in the way that the two strawberries are positioned in relation to each other. Having one strawberry cut open, that high contrast, and how this area kind of creates an area of emphasis is nice. And then how these relate to the butterflies, the open strawberry or the cut open strawberry, those colors relate really well to the strawberry. Oh, one last thing. This is what I was thinking about last night when I was, one final thing. So the color of the open strawberry is very similar to the color of the butterfly. Perhaps more importantly, the value, how light and dark. Value refers to light and dark. The value of these colors in the cut open strawberry are very similar, if not a little bit lighter than the butterfly. So my thought was that perhaps if you were just to darken, let me see if I can do this in a way that's not too egregious. All right, so I'm going to do this real quick and then pull up the... Well, before I do that, though, notice when I make this whole strawberry darker than the butterfly is going to stand out more, right? So that is the principle that I'm getting at here. If you were to make this whole open strawberry just a little bit darker than the butterfly is just going to get a little bit more of a lift. It's going to feel more like physically light, right? It's going to feel like it is, light tends to feel more, light value tends to feel more light weight, right? So having the strawberry be a little bit darker than the butterfly is going to help the butterfly feel more light. And it's also just going to make the butterfly stand out more because it's just that little bit dissimilar from the strawberry. So right now it's obviously very different, but if I pull down the opacity of that layer so it decreases the amount that they're different, right? So notice just as I make it darker and darker, how that butterfly is going to stand out more and more. I think even if they're just even if the strawberry cut open area is a little bit darker than the butterfly, that's going to be enough to make that butterfly just pop out a little bit more and feel more separate from the strawberries and feel like it's floating in space more. Just having it be a little bit more visually different than the strawberry. All right, so I think that's probably enough said. I'm gonna maybe turn this on and off a little bit. See how it's just a very subtle difference, but it's enough difference to make the butterfly visually, like, noticeably different than the strawberry in a way that helps separate it out and make it feel like it's more out in space. All right, so that is, I think, all I've got for you today. We've got the strawberries, we've got the birds, and the abstract gestural marks and fish. And with that, I'm going to cut over to myself. And hopefully next week I'm gonna. So I've been doing. How many months have I been doing this for? I can't. It's been at least a few months, and only now I'm realizing that my Wacom tablet is not mapped correctly to my screen. Actually, I take that back because I just recently got a kind of changed my computer setup. Anyway, I don't use my Wacom tablet enough in the last year or so to kind of be in tune with whether or not it's mapped correctly, but it has been a frustration. So hopefully by next week, this is nothing that you need to be worried about, but I guess I'm just thinking out loud. Hopefully by next week, I'll have this Wacom tablet set up correctly so that I can use it more effectively in these demonstrations rather than doing such childlike drawing and changing the images kind of in such a rough way. But hopefully these demonstrations are helpful and clear in what I'm trying to communicate. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks to those of you that are joining me live. It makes such a big difference to me to have people actually show up live. I know a lot of people watch it after the fact, watch the recording. I'm love to see how many people are actually watching these, and hope that they are instructive and helpful. And then most especially, thank you to the two artists who shared their work today. It's so great to talk about work that people are working for, not just for those of you that are watching, to know that there are people out there working on artwork and trying to solve these problems just like you are. But it's, just selfishly very satisfying to me and inspiring to me to talk about work that is new and that is in process. There's something very motivating to me to get these images, and I'm grateful for those of you or those two artists that shared their work today and understand it can be an uncomfortable thing to share your work, especially in process. So thank you for being willing. I hope more of you or those of you out there that are kind of sitting on the edge or wondering whether or not you want to send in your images, I hope you do. I can keep you anonymous if you'd like, or I can share your website or whatever you would like, if that is your preference. If you're interested in crit groups, if you're interested in classes, I'm going to be posting hopefully a resin class, a version of the resin class that I just finished, and a color class very soon, and then also keep an eye out for, or an ear out for, my podcast, Raw Materials, that is coming soon. If you're interested in my other podcast with my co-host Sabrina Ward Harrison, that can be found at roominthetrees.com. And that is a podcast about living a creative life, and well worth listening to, in my opinion. So check that out if you're interested in that as well. And with that, I think I am done for the day. I will be heading from here talking. When I turn this off, I'll go over and check out some of the comments. Thanks again to those of you that are joining me live. And I will see you again next week. If you want to share your images, or you want to be critiqued, send images to dabbleon, dabbleon.com @gmail.com. And I will see you all again next Thursday at 11 a.m. Los Angeles time, whatever that is, PST, PDT, something like that. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.